This is a guide to every Destined One deck that we have so far, so no Leo Odium, which I'll talk about when Set 5 does release. We had a couple weeks now to play these decks and see some results with them, so I'll give you my honest takes on each of these and how you should pilot them, as well as sample deck lists. Oh, and before we get started, be sure to like and subscribe, and let's see if we can get to 800 subs. Let's start with Aelquilibra. I think this is as close to an aggro deck that we have in Standard right now. Its ability lets you choose 3 rearguards and give them plus 5k each. This activates these units as overcharge effects, which basically makes them stronger. Most of them becomes 23k beaters, and the most impactful one of them all, Showdown, lets you multi-attack. Not only that, if you chose at least 2 units with overcharge, Aelquilibra gets an additional 10k and you get to draw a card, which is definitely a skill that an aggro deck wants. No matter if you're going first or second, you just get to pressure down your opponent with incredibly big columns. You also have cards like Brachial Force, which is amazing in this deck because more often than not, you'll be swinging with a huge booster that they will most likely just let you proc the effect, as well as Shenri to start the aggression even before your grade 3 turn. You also have an order that lets you fetch 2 overcharge units from the drop, which works extremely well with Shenri, and you won't be afraid of running out of gas for the aggro plan. Aelquilibra's Divine skill is also one that the opponent will always have to be wary about. You can fire this on your grade 3 turn going second, and just make each attack that much more devastating, especially with the fact that this takes 10k away from the trigger power if they were to check one defensively from this skill. Here is a simple deck list that showcases some of the points I talked about. This is one of the best new decks to come out of Destined Showdown. It has a great matchup against decks that need some time to set up and is pretty simple to pilot. Next up is Impauldio. The first time I read all the cards for this deck, I was not impressed, mainly because it is a 3 attack deck that relied on drive checks. Well, I was half right, but also half wrong. One of the most powerful cards for this deck is not even in the main deck, it's the token. When we take damage, we get to put a card from drop to the Aura Zone as gauge. And if we have 3 or less of these gauges, we get to give our Vanguard plus 5k if no triggers were checked. And we get to give the power no matter what when we have at least 4 gauges. This makes tier 1 decks like Shoujo Doji and Shiranui harder to finish you off on their multi-attack turns, as your Vanguard gets bulkier with each swing regardless of whether you check the trigger or not. And Impauldio's divine skill of quadruple checking basically is asking for a PG, and if they don't have it, well, good luck not just losing the game on the spot as it also gains a crit. You replenish 4 cards to your hand with just 1 attack. Not to mention Vinster also drive checks to make sure you survive the next turn, along with the combo of Nebula Invoke Dragon and the Blitz Order Fluctuate Buster Barrage to just keep reusing that 20k shield. The deck just scales very well because of Impauldio's effect. And although the deck doesn't have good supporting pieces outside of the 2 I mentioned, running the generics for Brentgate is good enough at least for now to help you dig deeper into the deck, like the Energy Cycler as well as Beldereet. And here's a simple deck list. I think we're seeing results for this deck because of the meta we're in, but as we move to a faster format or decks that generate more value, I think the usage percentage of this deck will drop. And then we move on to Alden. This new version is definitely better than the old one, but yes, it's another Cater Pile deck that uses Saragon as well as T-Fault and the Wisdom of the Beginning Order to generate you more value. However, this deck does have some new tools to make it really stand out against other similar decks. First off, Alden allows for multi-attack while generating card value himself. As a unit, your overcalling returns back to your hand, so something like a T-Fault or Ragunel can use their effects again next turn to get even more value. You'll be surprised by how big the hand of an older player becomes. Speaking about Ragunel, this card lets the deck attack 5 times with ease, as when it gets returned to hand, we can stand another rearguard, and on top of that, it gives a unit that was placed over this an additional 10k. You also have Ermac, that's just a terrifying attacker that hits for 35k if it's caught on top of Ragunel. Those numbers, going second on your first grade 3 turn, ask for way too much shield from the opponent. One cool card that can be included is Gragon, which only requires you to have a Vanguard with a Divine skill. And here's a simple deck list. I think this deck is just a more complete version of Rezile. You have the ability to just overwhelm your opponent with big numbers in the earlier turns and still threaten much bigger numbers compared to Rezile down the line. The Destined One deck that you really don't see a lot is Levidras. Levidras generates these Infinity Eyes markers for both you and your opponent, which gives your units that are on top of it an additional 10k power, and for your opponent, you can choose to remove the marker and take away 10k power from that unit when it attacks and you draw a card. So it's just a nice way to get more cards in your hand to guard. I think the idea of the deck is cool, but it's just trying to do too many different things, but it's not really excelling in any of them. For example, let's look at Onfall and Autogaster. All the effects are tied to Infinity Eyes markers, which means that this doesn't have any value in the early game. And its ability to multi-attack is only possible when you have at least 3 of the markers, which means it's locked until turn 4 and forcing you to use the Divine skill. Speaking about the Divine skill, it's definitely one of the weaker ones. Just like Wilstra, you're kind of forced to use it at the same time every game, which means there's no surprise when you use this effect, and not as impactful as some of the other skills we see. We do have Foxo for the grade 3 turn as another way of multi-attacking, but because both multi-attackers are using the back row rearguard columns, the numbers aren't actually that threatening. A trigger check can make all these attacks easily guardable. One way to counter this problem is to run Tideline Dragon, making both it and another unit 10k bigger. The deck does have ways of replenishing the board as you're committing quite a lot to perform these multi-attacks, such as Huli to call unit back from the drop, or you can run orders like Mythiarch Habitat or In the Dim Darkness to enable beaters such as Devouring Arms. And here's a simple deck list. Like I said, the deck tries to do too much. It tries to take power away from the opponent's units, tries to multi-attack, tries to gain card advantage, but none are that impactful on their own. We arrive at the last Destined One and it's Lisciafael, also known as MOB the Reskinned, because its main ability is activated by sucking in your rearguards. The units you're putting into Soul when Lisciafael attacks have different ways of generating value, like Velatio, which allows you to countercharge, and there are also cards like Resius, which you will happily put into Soul as you already got the value off of it. She also has a powerful Divine skill since the fighter, not the unit, so you will still have it if you rewrite, gets a permanent plus 5k and an extra crit. And on top of that, you get to stand her the turn you activate this skill. Even though you lose your drives, it still makes guarding this a pain. Just like how when you guard against Varga, you have to think of where they will place their trigger power. Albelina is the multi-attacker for the deck, and the one card you don't want to put into Soul. You want to make sure the other front row rearguard is sucked in by Lisciafael in order for this to stand. And here's a simple deck list. Because you need 6 cards in Soul to use Lisciafael's Divine skill, it makes running the Willista Rhyline the best choice as there are still cards in the deck that require Soul Blast, and you don't want to overcommit Lisciafael's first effect just to get into that 6th Soul. Those are all the Destined Ones we got from the latest booster set. What do you guys think about these new decks? One thing I do wonder is how they compare against the Faded ones. At first, I thought the Faded ones were definitely better, but the more I played with these decks, I think the power level is actually closer than I thought. When we do get the rest of the cards for Leo Odium, I'll make a tier list of every Divine skill deck, so look forward to that. And that's it for this video. Once again, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.